and you won't be in the recording. All right, so good evening once again, and welcome to the presentation on What Would Spiritual Video Games Look Like by Dr. Robert Haworth. So it's my pleasure to be your MC for this evening. We're going to begin with a unity prayer that I will sing in French, and then I'm going to introduce the speaker for this evening. Oh mon Dieu, unis les cœurs tes serviteurs et révèle ton grand dessein. Puisse-t-il suivre tes commandements et observer ta loi, Appliquons mon Dieu dans leurs efforts et accorde-leur la force de te servir. Oh Dieu, ne les abandonne pas à eux-mêmes. Mais par la lumière de ta connaissance, guide leur pas. Et par ton amour, réjouis leur cœur. En vérité, tu es leur recours, leur Seigneur. All right, thank you once again, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'm thrilled to be given the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, because not only is he an incredible person, very intelligent, very kind, a loving father and husband, but he's also a good friend of mine, and I've had the pleasure of working with Rob in our work through the area teaching committee in the Baha'i community for a number of years. So Dr. Robert Haworth received his Ph.D. from the University of Western Ontario, and his research investigated ways of influencing human cognition through game design. He's also working currently full-time as a software developer as he continues to analyze, investigate, and build video games to explore different ways that they can benefit society. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Dr. Robert Haworth. Take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Roxanne. So this there we go. This is going to be a rather exploratory talk. And I'm focusing largely on video games, not because there aren't the same things that could happen with board games or card games and so forth, but because video games is my area of expertise. That's sort of what I know the most about. And this is going to be exploratory because there really aren't great examples of video games that include spirituality in a deep, meaningful way. I'm going to be looking at a few so that we can see how spirituality can be included in video games. But there aren't really that many that do a great job of it. And largely that is because spirituality is not really the focus of design for many games. One of them that I will be looking at where it was the focus, but it's really not a common theme. There's plenty of games that use religious imagery, either in their story or in some of the characterization of the different characters that you can play as or that you can meet and so forth. But those aren't really what I'm going to be focusing on. And to start off why I'm going to be focusing on a particular way of using spirituality. I'm going to be starting with this rather long quote that is from Shoghi Effendi to explain sort of why I'm looking at spirituality the way that I am. So how to attain spirituality is indeed a question to which every young man and woman must sooner or later try to find a satisfactory answer. It is precisely because no satisfactory answer has been given or found that the modern youth finds itself bewildered and is being consequently carried away by the materialistic forces that are so powerfully undermining the foundation of man's moral and spiritual life. Indeed, the chief reason for the evils now rampant in society is the lack of spirituality. The materialistic civilization of our age has so much absorbed the energy and interest of mankind that people in general do no longer feel the necessity of raising themselves above the forces and conditions of their daily material existence. There is not sufficient demand for things that we call spiritual to differentiate them from the needs and requirements of our physical existence. It is this condition, so sadly morbid, into which society has fallen, that religion seeks to improve and transform. The core of religious faith is that mystic feeling which unites man with God. This state of spiritual communion can be brought about and maintained by means of meditation and prayer. And this is the reason why Baha'u'llah has so much stressed the importance of worship. It is not sufficient for a believer merely to accept and observe the teachings. He should, in addition, cultivate the sense of spirituality, which he can acquire chiefly by means of prayer. The Baha'i faith, like all other divine religions, is thus fundamentally mystic in character. Its chief goal is the development of the individual and society through the acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers. It is the soul of man which has first to be fed, and this spiritual nourishment prayer can best provide. Now, I wanted to start with this particular quote because it highlights or at least from a Baha'i perspective, the very real and very strong importance of spirituality for humanity. And although it indicates that the Baha'i faith is important in this, there's a few sort of statements here in terms of this core of spiritual communion, that mystic unity between man and God, and that the chief goal of the Baha'i faith is the development of individual and society through the acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers. And that is, of course, connected to meditation and prayer. And so if we're thinking then about video games that are really going to support spirituality, they need to be connected to this. They need to be connected to either the spiritual communion or the acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers. Otherwise, at least from my perspective, I don't think that they truly represent what something that is supposed to help you spiritually would do. And although this quote ends with the spiritual nourishment prayer can best provide, that I think is also important to suggest that spiritual video games are meant to be a tool and something that they can support us in different ways, but they shouldn't really replace other aspects of our life. And if we want to look at sort of prayer and meditation, I don't think that on its own is really going to work too well in a video game. I'm going to get into a few reasons a bit later onto why I don't think that will work. However, the acquisition of spiritual virtues is something that could be put into a video game, because this has more to do with action and reflection that is something that games could actually do. And then, of course, there's the question of, okay, well, if this is something that could be put into a video game, are there examples of virtues that could be explored or expressed through a video game? So what if we were to make a game where positive relationships with others is important, building community is important, Showing love and consideration to others and to our environment is important. If we wanted to have a game where these are important factors for it, what would something like that look like? So I want to start off with sort of our first major example, to be the game Stardew Valley. This is from 2016. It was very popular at the time. It's still very popular. It's now available on PC, Nintendo Switch. I think it's also on like the iPad. And I think it's also in other mobile environments. There's been a lot of different places where this game is available. But the general premise of the game is that you're exhausted and disappointed with your life working in this mega corporation, and you sort of quit your job and you move to this little town of Stardew Valley. And you move there because your grandfather said that there is an inheritance for you there. And it's a farmhouse and a plot of land that you now own. And the goal of the game is that you work this land, you make an income from what you work, you use that money to sort of grow the farm, but also to invest in the town, to see what other people need. How can you best help make the town thrive and make friends and sort of help everybody prosper? That is sort of the overall goal of this game. And the game sort of contains themes of stewardship, so looking after the land, helping others, trying to make sure that if there are various problems people are having, or if there are things that are lost they're looking for, or they're not sure how to handle certain social relationships, you can try to help them out, and then work to improve the overall community, take part in various community events that are happening, certain festivals, help to sponsor certain things and rebuild some of the community centers that are in the town and so forth. These are some of the general themes, and these are also things that people actually enjoy playing Stardew Valley for. They like some of the aspects of farming, but they also really like the idea of just talking to different people in town, seeing what they're doing, participating in the various festivals. People like that. Now, the big question, and this is why I wanted to start with this game, because it has a number of these positive themes in it. And although spirituality is not a core facet of this game, it's something that people could probably argue it is spiritual because of the way that it encourages some of these positive social relationships. And so I wanted to start with this to say, is including these themes really enough? And so if we think about, I've got two quotes here from Baha'u'llah. So the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. And let your acts be a guide unto all mankind. It is through your deeds that ye can distinguish yourself from others. Through them, the brightness of your light can be shed upon the whole earth. Now, I bring both of these quotes here that talk about our actions, because if we're thinking about it in terms of a game, if we actually just include a few spiritual concepts in the game and they're part of the overall theme, does it really affect our actions in the game? Are they affecting what we are doing? And to think about this, then I'm going to go to this idea of the core mechanic. This is a more academic perspective on video games, but it's also an important one for design, as well as just generally people looking at games and wanting to play them. The core mechanic is this essential set of interactions that you repeatedly form in a cycle, and that's the way that you play the game. So if we take Tetris as an example, it's because it's a very simple game. It's iconic for this type of thing. All that you do is you move a few of these shapes. I don't know if I can actually move my mouse around. You move a few of these different shapes around on this board. You can rotate them and you can place them, and that's it. That's the only action that you can perform. And everything else from the game Tetris arises from those set of actions. If we want to take Stardew Valley, there's actually a large variety of things that you can do. So I've sort of summarized a few of them here. So some of the actions relate to farming. So you can plant and harvest some crops. You can plow the field so that you can plant. You can chop some wood. You can go into a mine and start harvesting some stone that's there. Then you can, of course, use those materials to build other things or sell them to other people who are going to use it to build up their houses and so forth. And you can do some fishing, and you can take care of animals, make sure that they're fed. You can brush the cows and so forth so that they're clean, and brush horses. And I know that in real life, animals like these sorts of things. And so in the game, it simulates that by the animals liking you more as you try to do those sorts of things. But there are also social activities. You can talk to people, you can give them gifts. If they say they need something, you can go look for that item and give it to them. You can participate in community events. So I've got an example of one down here on the bottom left of sort of talking to different people in there. And this is a big potluck that they're having. So you bring a certain meal that you've provided and add it to the table of food that's there. And you can help fund different community projects. So all of these things, like some of this is relatively basic activity. Some of it is social things. This is mostly positive in the sense that there's not really a whole lot here compared to, say, more violent video games. It doesn't seem to be much here that's would be considered a problem. However, again, if we want to think about this from the perspective of spirituality, are these things related to spiritual virtues? Are they related to developing those types of things? Now, of course, you could ask, well, can a game actually help you develop that? And I want to highlight sort of these activities that you do in the game because I think that a game can actually help you develop these things. And the reason I think that is because we can sort of do an analogy. How do we get better at riding a bike? I mean, this can be generally, how do you get better at driving or at baking a cake or, cleaning the house? How do we get better at any sort of activity that we're doing? We practice it. We do the same thing over and over and over again. And anytime we fail or we make a mistake, we reflect upon that and try to improve ourselves, try to do better next time. And so then you can say, well, what happens when we perform the same thing over and over again in a video game? We're effectively doing the same loop. So if we get better at riding a bike by constantly riding a bike, and then we get better at it, well, if we're playing a video game and we're constantly playing it over and over and over again, we get better at the game. But the important thing is that we get better at whatever that thing is we're doing in the game. So if we look at, for example, Tetris, what are we actually practicing? And Tetris has been studied quite extensively in the academic literature, actually, to understand what it does. And so one thing, of course, is you get better at pushing buttons really fast. Because in order to play it well, you need to be able to, of course, rotate and move shapes around quickly. And if you're slow at pushing buttons, you're not going to be able to do that. But you also get really good at visualizing the orientation and position of shapes. And planning ahead in terms of saying, okay, well, if I put this here, I'm going to need these other blocks to go there, there, and there. So, but I may not get those blocks, but if I get these other blocks instead, I can put them here and do. And people who play Tetris really well, and you watch them sort of play, they are moving these shapes around in the speed of such like. It's difficult to even see how they are thinking where these shapes are going. And it's because they have actually practiced that visualization aspect so heavily from playing this game that they've gotten really good at it. And there is research that suggests that transfers to other things. Now, Tetris is, of course, a very specific example. So, I mean, if you're going to be playing Tetris a lot, that's probably not going to help you develop, say, compassion or develop patience. Right? It might develop patience. It's hard to say, but it won't necessarily develop some of these other spiritual virtues. That's not really the point, but it's not going to help you with that. If we go to the example of Stardew Valley, then what are we actually practicing? And so looking at the way that people play this game, so not necessarily how it was designed, but what people do when they play this. The things that people practice has to do with memorizing certain in-game content. People memorize, what does this person like? There's about 20 people in the town. This person likes these items, but they don't like those ones. This person likes these items, they don't like that one. People also memorize schedules. They know, okay, well, this shop is open on Wednesdays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, but it's closed on Thursday. Today is Tuesday. I want to get this item to so-and-so. So I have to get to the shop before it closes. So I have to do this other thing today. That is actually the way that people play this game. There's a lot of emphasis on remembering these schedules and on time management, on trying to make sure that you can get everything you need done before you don't have the ability to anymore. And there's a lot of trade-offs in terms of doing stuff on the farm, harvesting the crops, or just planting and trying to find certain things versus socializing, making sure that you're talking to different people, keeping the friendships that you have going. So those are the things that people practice. And then, of course, there's the question that I want to bring up is that how does that relate to spirituality? Do those things actually help us with that? So are these things that I've listed, looking at time management, looking at trade-offs between the activities I'm doing, memorizing some of the in-game content and so forth, are these actions connected to the spiritual concepts that the developers try to put in the game or that we think about as this game displaying? Sort of, but not really. They might help in other ways, but memorizing in-game content isn't going to help. Like, it doesn't matter if I know such and such character's schedule, and that's not going to help me in real life. It helps me play the game. Getting better at certain aspects of time management might help in real life, but that, again, maybe it helps me to develop patience, but it's not going to help me necessarily develop other sorts of qualities. It could help me with, say, managing prayer, making sure that I spend time during my day to pray. It could help me with trying to schedule different activities that I'm part of, making sure that there's enough time to do everything. It could help me with that, but those are more tangential benefits, so to speak. So do the actions help us develop spiritual virtues? Not directly. There is the idea of I'm thinking about other people in terms of the interest, things that they like. But because there are ways I can get around that in the game, it doesn't necessarily help me develop that. For some people may develop it as a consequence of playing the game, but it's more of a accidental benefit for some people rather than something direct. And I bring up this last question, do they help us reflect upon life? Because a lot of the benefit that spirituality brings is giving us time to pause and reflect on not only what are we doing in our day-to-day life, but the higher question of what is the point? Why am I doing this? Why spend time doing anything really? And that's an important question really to ask. And does this game help us reflect upon that? Maybe, maybe not. It's certainly not something that would be better than other activities that you could be doing. I mean, if you played this game for, say, 40 hours a week, after 4 months, you might pause and reflect upon your life to say, what am I doing with my time? Why am I spending so much time playing this game? But I don't think that's necessarily the intention here. I also want to list these questions because another aspect of this talk is not simply, what would these games look like? But in general, if I wanted to look at video games and decide, oh, is this really going to help me? Is there a spiritual benefit to this game? One of the best ways of doing that, of course, is looking at, okay, well, when people play this game, what do they do? What are the actions that they perform? And then asking some of these questions. Are those actions connected to spiritual concepts in any particular way? does that action actually help us develop a particular virtue? Do they help us really reflect upon life at all? Because if the answer is like an outright no, well then that game is not going to help you at all in terms of spirituality. And if the answer is yes, or if the answer is yes, then, or if you think the answer is yes, then go for it. Say this looks like a good game to try. If the answer is maybe, well then I'll leave it up to you about whether you think it's worth playing or introducing to someone else. Overall, looking at Stardew Valley, I think that it's a fun game. I think that it's certainly great in terms of a lot of the things that you can do and some of the positive ideas behind it. But I think that it's a very weak game in terms of spirituality. It is stronger than most other games that are available. I will definitely say that. But that's primarily because this game involves community activities and socializing with other characters, and in a way that where you have to actually care about the other characters' attitudes and such. And if a lot of other games don't even have that in any way at all, and so they're just not good from a spiritual perspective. So then, if I start from this game and mention all these sorts of things that the game could do, and then at the end say, well, it's not really that good from a spiritual perspective. Why is that? And if I say that this is actually one of the better games that is available, at least now, in terms of anything to do with spirituality. So why is that? Is it difficult to put spirituality into a game? So I'm going to be looking at the next example, which I think is a much stronger example of a game that uses spirituality. And this is a very old game as far as video games go. In the early 1980s, Richard Garriott, the developer of what is the Ultima series and sort of one of the major games that has influenced much of what role-playing games, both in terms of video games and sort of pen and paper like Dungeons and Dragons, he said a lot of strong influences on that. He wanted to make a game where you play as a hero, doing heroic things with the goal of making the world better. And at the time, this was with sort of very common making the world better perspectives in terms of, there's some evil villain, you have to go kill them, that you have to do a bunch of other stuff first. But people need help, so you have to go help them and so forth. And the first three games that he made, Ultima 1, 2, and 3, included ways of being heroic. Now, this is the 1980s, so early 1980s. So the games were not particularly complex, both in terms of what you could do and how they looked. There's a screenshot at the bottom of this from Ultima 3 from 1983 or 84, I forget which it was, to give you a sense of sort of how games looked at the time. So there were opportunities, not a whole lot. But the important thing is not so much were there opportunities, but that people didn't actually play the game that way. That's not how they tried to play this. And what he found, so I had a short video, I think I'm going to skip it temporarily in the interest of time. What he found was that people didn't play the game as a hero. They weren't, as he said, role-playing the hero. They were instead trying to figure out, how do I maximize my character's strength? How do I get the most for the stuff that I have? Where can I find this thing for the cheapest price? Looking at all those aspects of the game. And he learned this because with Ultima 3, he was able to get player feedback, and the players told them, I love your game. This is the way that I play it. I think this is great. And he read this and he was saying, oh, they're not playing the game the way that I intended at all. This is not what the game is. And he realized that if he wanted people to be a hero, the game had to check their behavior. It had to look at the actions they were doing and reward heroic actions and penalize unheroic actions. And from this, he developed the game Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar, in 1980. This is 1985 when it was released. And this is actually one of the it is considered one of the greatest role-playing games that had been created for the computer. Now, of course, there's millions of these games, so this is greatest in the terms of top 100 and so forth, which is still impressive, but it was very popular. Let's say it's very popular at the time that it was released. It's still available. It's available for free, actually, on Good Old Games, but you can also get it on, like, even the iPad now. They've done a port for that. The general premise of this game is that you play as a person in Earth. They feel disappointed and directionless in their life, and they go to take a break and relax in nature. They stumble upon this magical gateway, and they go into a fantasy world. They're asked a bunch of questions about their interest in terms of how they would behave certain ways from a virtuous perspective. So I've got one example here. So thou art at a crossroads in thy life. Dost thou choose the honorable life of a paladin, striving for truth and courage, or choose the humble life of a shepherd and a world of simplicity and peace? So here the question is more, do you want to value honor or do you want to value humility? Which of these would you place higher? And this game was iconic in the sense that when you create the character that you're going to play as, this is how you do it. You're asked a whole bunch of questions about, effectively, would you sacrifice something, or would you try to seek justice? Would you be compassionate to this person, or would you be honorable in how you would deal with them? Like, there's all these types of questions where there's no really right or wrong answer. It's more about which do you value more. And this helps determine the spiritual value of the character you build. And for the plot of the game, you learn that the evil monsters of the world are gone. There really isn't any evil that you need to defeat, but the king needs an avatar, someone who embodies the virtues of the land through their actions. And that anyone can do this, they just have to put the effort into it. Richard Garrett was heavily inspired by Buddhism. He was really into Buddhism at the time. He still is, but at the time of developing this, he used a lot of ideas from that in terms of how he would develop this game. So the goal of the game is you become the avatar. You have to master 8 virtues of the land, which involves doing certain actions that help to build up your capacity to do in that virtue. Gain the trust of various characters representing these virtues throughout the land. And then all of you as a group, you enter the abyss and you do what is sort of the thematically common story of going into the underworld to sort of release your old self, and you are reborn as a new being. And this is done through going into the abyss in the game, going past a whole bunch of different obstacles. Some are puzzles, some are monsters, and so forth, until you find the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. And upon gazing upon that, you realize you have become the avatar, and the game ends. Now, in practice, you explore the world, find treasures and secret items and so forth, fight monsters, talk to people, and solve various puzzles. Now, note that these actions in particular are not particularly spiritual. There's not really anything virtuous about exploring the world or fighting monsters. So then where is the spiritual component to this game? So here again, if we look at it from a core mechanic perspective, you move around the world, you talk to people, ask them questions, give them items and so forth, and you fight monsters. And that's largely it. That is sort of the core of this game. Now, the spirituality is in the sense that the game keeps track of virtue points. And I've put them in quotation marks here because it's actually more like you have a score of compassion. You have a score of honor. You have a score for humility. I'm trying to remember all of them here, and then you need this score to basically get to 100. And then you have mastered that virtue, and you can, once you've mastered all, you enter the abyss and so forth. If you do actions that are contrary to that, you go down, and you can go down to like -300 and so forth. Like there's really no limit in terms of where this goes. It's just you need to keep them high. And if you don't, you lose the game. So the actions that you do affect the points that you get. And that is where the spirituality really comes into this game. So I'm going to be giving an example here of this. So this is, again, a screenshot from the game. And this is detailing combat. And I want to include this because plenty of role-playing games have combat. Plenty of video games in general have combat. It is one of the easiest mechanic for people to implement. And so a lot of games have it. Now in this game, combat helps you be strong enough to actually explore the abyss because there's tons of combat that you have to do there. You need to be strong enough to recruit the allies because they don't think that you're a serious enough individual if it's clear that you're not powerful enough to go into the abyss. And the only way that you get combat experience is from killing enemies, whether these are zombies, whether these are pirates, whether these are like stereotypical orcs or goblins and so forth, or like bears or snakes, things like this. And this is where Ultima 4 was very different in terms of how it approached combat. So if you kill a creature in battle, the valor, which is one of these virtues, increases. If you run away from the battle, you lose valor and you also lose sacrifice. If you die in battle, it doesn't end the game. The king sort of brings you back, but you lose whatever progress you made. So if you were partway through a particular dungeon, you have to start back at the town and go through it all again. But you can keep playing the game. But that actually increases sacrifice as a virtue. If you run away from something that isn't inherently evil, like a snake or a bat or like something like this that's actually killing you, or you let something flee, even if it's like an orc of some sort, that raises compassion. And it also raises justice because you are being fair in terms of how you are treating these other creatures. But you don't get any experience. And so if you start a fight, so if someone attacks you, it's okay. But if you try to attack anything else, that lowers compassion, justice, and honor, because it's not honorable, it's not compassionate, and it is not just to just start fighting with something. If you're defending yourself, it's different. So all of these greatly change the way that you go about fighting in the game. And I bring up this because so many games, again, involve fighting, that this changes the way that one has to think about combat in a game that, in a game genre where combat is a significant part of it. Now, of course, these aren't the only areas where the spirituality is included. So if you solve various quests, this raises your honor. If you talk to people without boasting about how great of a person you are, this raises your humility. If you give to people who are begging, this increases your compassion. And that can be difficult because it's actually hard to get money at times. You can donate blood, and that raises sacrifice, but it lowers your character's health and makes combat more difficult. You can also cheat certain merchants by giving them less money than you really should be to pay for certain items. But that greatly lowers honor, justice, and honesty. And as a result, it's very hard to beat the game if you do that. But if you're honest with them in terms of paying them the appropriate amount or paying them even more than the amount, then it also raises these same virtues. I think if you pay them more, it raises compassion. I forget exactly, but the point is more that how you sort of treat the merchants in the game affects these virtues. And so these components were directly connected to the game mechanics, such that the way that you played the game was because of how you wanted to be spiritual. And if you did not raise the virtue points, you could not win the game. As a result, thinking about the spiritual implications of your actions actually was a major part of the game. And people who played the game liked that because they liked that there was a deeper aspect of the game. It was not simply, oh, this thing is now fighting me, I'm just going to go kill it. Well, that depends. If I do that, how is that really the just thing to do? Is, you know, he's running away now. Do I let him run away? I really could use the experience and the money that I get from him. Like, so trying to make those decisions is actually significant. And that is, I think, something that spiritual video games really need. It's more that the actions you perform do things that could help you in terms of developing virtues in real life. So thinking about being compassionate to others in Ultima 4, that may help you think about how you're being compassionate to others. But the key thing from Ultima 4 was more that it actually helped people reflect upon specific virtues, reflect upon, is this actually a compassionate act? Is this a just act? And that is something that is quite useful in terms of real life, thinking about our daily actions. And is this something that is this going to be a compassionate thing? Is this a just thing to be doing? Is this honorable? Those are a game that really helps you think about that. That is really of great benefit. I think plenty of games could be changed to include these spiritual components, just as Ultima 4 effectively changed how role-playing games worked to include some of these ideas. Until sort of we get to that point, it's simply a matter of looking at the actions that you're doing in a game and thinking about, you know, is this causing me to think about spirituality at all? Because if the answer is no, then it's not really that spiritual of a game. And that is all for now. Thank you. Are there any questions?
That was great, Rob. I didn't have a question, but I had a comment.